What is bisque firing?
When we think about what bisque firing is, we are taking clay and firing it to a temperature where it's going through a process called quartz inversion. That quartz inversion causes the clay to make a permanent physical change and chemical change from clay to ceramic. But ultimately, the reason that we do it is that bisque fired pot is more stable and allows us to handle it and use it to decorate or glaze without as high of a probability of breaking it.
When you say fire a pot, do you throw it into a fire?
You could. When I talk about firing a pot, I'm often referring to the act of putting the pot inside of a kiln and then firing that kiln, like applying either gas or wood or electricity to bring that kiln slowly up to temperature, whatever that target temperature is.
Can I use any clay for pottery, or do I have to buy a special kind?
Yeah, you can use any clay for pottery. The big thing with choosing a clay, you could go out in your backyard or in your local woods. Now, you should obviously get permission and you don't want to disrupt land, but if you can roll a piece of clay into a coil and bend it around your finger, then it is probably viable clay for you to make something with.
Is clay mud?
What makes clay special and individual is that clay is a platelet-like structure, and that platelet-like structure allows it to have plasticity. And what plasticity is that when we bend the material, it doesn't break.
What's the best way to make sure my pottery is even and symmetrical?
When our goal is to do that, usually we're either going to be throwing pots on the wheel or making things on the wheel, because the wheel is really good at making things round and symmetrical as your skill improves. Or you're coil building or slab building so that your walls are going to be even and symmetrical.
How do I apply glaze correctly?
If we sort of think about commercially available paint-on glazes, we apply those with a paintbrush, multiple coats usually. Usually you read the label and you figure out this says apply 3, solid coats to get desired effect. In my studio, we have dip glazes, and we have glazes that I make from raw materials, and we bisque fire our pots so that they're porous. And we dip those bisque-fired pots into a suspension of material. Suspension is basically dust and water. And when we submerge that bisque-fired pot into the dust and water, it absorbs water, depositing an even layer of dust, aka glaze, on the surface. And you remove it from the glaze, and you have an even coat of glaze applied to the pot.
What temperature should I fire my pottery to?
Picking your target temperature is based on a bunch of different factors. And so oftentimes when we're picking our temperature, we're going by the clay manufacturer's recommendation of where that clay hits maturity.
Can I fire pottery in my oven?
Unfortunately, we can't fire pottery in our oven. Our oven at absolute max probably reaches 600 degrees, and quartz inversion happens higher than that.
How do I prevent glaze runs or streaks on my pottery?
Preventing glaze from running is usually a combination of firing temperature and a thickness that the glaze is applied. So you always want to test your glazes. You want to apply them to what's called a test tile and fire them on what's called a waster slab to find out whether your glaze runs at the temperature that you or your community studio or your next door neighbor might be firing their kiln to.
I put a pot in the kiln and it cracked. What can I do?
If your pot cracks in the kiln, you can still potentially glaze that pot. If your clay cracks before you put it in the kiln, I would probably encourage you to recycle that back into usable clay and make it into a new pot. If you want to sort of try to save the pot that's already cracked, you can often glaze it, and that glaze will sort of somewhat cover that crack depending on how superficial or architectural that crack is through the pot. If you like this content, like, subscribe, and comment. Your comments really play into what I make my next video about.
That's